Welcome everybody to another Mickey's Munch and Learn. Today I'm going to talk about transformation and how it doesn't have to be such a drastic project to make a huge difference. Many transformational projects require a lot of scale-out architectures, a lot of implementation, a lot of design, a lot of cost, a lot of licenses, and all with an end to actually improve system performance. So when I look at application architecture, one of the things that I see most companies doing is actually looking to transform their application so they can respond quicker to the customer's needs. In this new time of during COVID and going beyond COVID, it's clear that everything's become remote working. Everything's being done from home or from remotely, from buying groceries to trades to working from home. And this has impacted systems a lot, where a lot of organizations are really looking to move forward their transformational projects. But there's things you can do to actually impact your system performance so you can meet your customers' needs and actually meet your revenue demands or margin demands. So what you're going to take away from this talk today, there are three things that we're going to talk about. Number one is, how can you increase the velocity of your revenue and margin by 800 to 900%? So what do I mean by that? What I'm thinking here is actually, when you look at your own application systems, it may be a SaaS application, it may be a trading system. In any one given hour, for example, you may be generating $1 million worth of margins. The thing is that you can't go beyond that $1 million in an hour because your systems just don't scale out enough. So you may be restricted to the number of concurrent users that can get on your system, and any new users have to queue up. So increasing velocity is about how can you squeeze more transactions in the same space of time, and doing that without the costs. And the second thing hopefully you'll take away from this presentation is, how can you reduce your support costs if you own perpetual database licenses? Now, most of you know I work for Oracle, but I'm not specifically talking about Oracle. There are many database vendors out there who sell perpetual licenses, and there's an additional support fee. On average, it's about 20% of your license cost. How do you save money on that on a perpetuity basis on a year after year after year after year? It's certainly something that most customers are looking to do. I mean, you can write off your database license fee, but you can't write off your support fees. You have to keep, writing that down as part of your expenses every year. So that's the second thing I want you to take away from this. How can you look at, reducing your support costs of your database licenses, particularly the perpetual license that you may have bought from a vendor? And then also, if you're looking after a data center and all of a sudden you need to do a scale out of database servers, you're facing a challenge. Where do you scale them out? You have to add more servers into the data center, buy some more servers. It's more heating, more cooling, more power, more real estate costs. Where do you actually put them? Particularly if you're not in your own physical building and you're renting space, it just could be quite difficult to do it on time as when required. So if you're looking after a data center and you have these demands, how can you actually, drive some performance from your existing systems and address your demand needs without having to do that and save all that? So those are the three things I want to talk about today, or at least hope you take away from today's discussion. So let's talk a little bit about increasing revenue velocity. So how can you actually increase the velocity of your revenue by 800 or 900%, without scaling out your architecture? For that, I just need to talk about this particular diagram. I'm going to use this diagram, should I say, to talk about it. So this doesn't sort of specify anybody's particular system, but the numbers here are just to help you understand the enormity of what I'm talking about. So they're just fictitious, but it gives you an idea where I'm going. So we got a system here which the laptop or the computer represents 500 concurrent users, and that's the maximum capacity of this system. It can handle requests from 500 concurrent users. In the middle you've got the servers, the app servers, the web servers, receiving all the requests, and then at the end it's going to the database. And quite often it's the database that has the limitations on how many concurrent connections it can handle at any one time. So if this system is got a maximum capacity of 500 users per hour at any one time, that generates $1 million per hour in margin, or maybe $100 million an hour in revenue. That's what your system is. And if you wanted to then look at what you might pay for the licenses of the database at the back end, just sort of as a reference point, maybe you spent $100,000 on database licenses for this 500 user maximum capacity system. Now, as your user demand goes up, i.e. you want to increase the velocity, then it's difficult on this system as it is. When you get to 500 concurrent users, all you can do is queue them up. So you go from doing $1 million of margin an hour to having to queue the customers up to actually the next hour. So when you look at trying to add another 500 concurrent users, then typically what you're going to have to do is add another database server in there, which means space in the data center, which means database licenses. And in this case, to add another 500 concurrent users, taking to 1,000 concurrent users, you have to spend another $100,000 in database licenses. Now, what you've achieved by that is $2 million per hour in margin, or maybe $200 million an hour in revenue. It's worth the investment, yes, but it's time, it's effort, it's a lot of work. Does it go up into production straight away? There's a whole bunch of factors there involved. Now, I'm not saying your database licenses cost $100,000. It could be more, it could be less. But you can get the idea. Every time you want to add more users to handle the demand, you're going to have to scale out the architecture. So in this particular example, for every 500 users that you want to add on in terms of concurrent users, to handle the velocity of business coming in, you have to spend $100,000 for every 500 users. And conversely, if you then went up to an additional 3,000 users, so it went 3,000 plus 500 plus 500, that's 4,000 users, arguably you have to spend another $600,000 in database license fees. So this particular solution that I put here as an example would cost about $800,000 in license fees alone, but that would get you 4,000 concurrent users. You then got to consider your annual support cost. Most software vendors charge about 20% of the perpetual license as a support cost. And in this case, at $800,000, you've got an additional cost of $160,000 per year in perpetuity, as long as you keep those databases live. And you would want them on support. It doesn't matter which vendors, you'd want them on support. So in the first year, you've got a total cost of $960,000, which is $800,000 of license and $160,000 of support. So this is a typical, I guess, common way of scaling out your capacity on demand in your on-premise or your own implementations of your applications. And that's what's driving transformation, because if you can actually change your application to a more microservices architecture and get it in the cloud, you'd get away from this huge cost of scaling out. But that's not going to happen anytime quick. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, how can you get this 800 to 900% increase in velocity of your systems without all that cost I just talked about? Well, let's take that same example, 500 user maximum capacity system, and you spent $100,000 database license for that 500 concurrent users, and you want to add an additional 500 users. Typically, what we would have done, as I showed in the previous example, added another server, and you keep adding another database server and adding another chunk of database license. In this case, we're not going to do that. We're going to resist from scaling out by scaling out the servers. We're not going to go and scale out the servers. We're going to do something very, very different, something quite unique. What we're going to do is intervene between the application servers and the database servers. I'm going to install something called Oracle Linux Smart Flash Cache. This is a feature of Oracle Linux UEK, and it's not just for Oracle databases, it's for any relational database. And what you're going to do is install a flash storage card into your server, and that's going to come in between your database and your server, and Oracle Linux as the operating system is going to manage the information flow through to the database and back. What effectively this does, it accelerates the rate at which database requests are actually handled. So if you've got an in-memory database, it'll speed that up 8 or 9x more. If you haven't got an in-memory database, it'll just speed up your database 8 or 9x more. Combined with UEK, you're getting 8 to 900% performance gains. So what is this doing? It's not increasing the number of connections to your database. It's actually speeding up the rate at which it actually processes a request, getting 8 or 9 times more requests done in the same time. And the great thing about this particular solution, you can implement this without scaling out the architecture as we described. It's just a matter of switching on Oracle Linux UEK and switching on this feature which is unique to us. We've developed this primarily to help the Oracle database, but it's not specific to the Oracle database. Wim Kokarts, our Mr. Linux, talks about this in one of his blogs. It will work on any relational database. So when you then look at going beyond the extra 500 users to the 3,000 users, you've got capacity. Because this particular feature speeds up the rate at which it deals with database requests, the reads coming at the database, 8 or 9x more, then you've got that capacity to add another 3,000 concurrent users. It means until you get to 4,000 concurrent users, you don't need to add another database. It's a huge saving. It's a huge saving. And the great thing about this is that when you were doing $1 million a month in margin or $100 million a month in margin, just by switching on this feature, you've almost 8 or 9x that margin capacity. And that's amazing. And this is not a very hard thing to implement. This is very, very quick. In fact, if you go onto Wim Kokart's blog on this, you'll see it's a command line and a return and it's on. You stick the Smart Flash Cache storage into your server and run one command line and it's running. It's so simple, but you only get it on Oracle Linux UEK. So in this example, with Smart Flash Cache turned on, you can increase the speed and the number of transactions in the same time by 700 to 900%, depending on your application. You save $700,000 in additional database license fees by my example, just by implementing this. And you get a 7 to 9x performance increase, saving 86% on support fees, because you just don't need to buy those licenses anymore. What's even more interesting is most Oracle databases run on some form of Linux today. Switching over to Oracle Linux UEK will invariably save you money on your existing provider. But what's more important, not only by switching over, is that the savings you made are from an existing budget you're paying somebody else. So you're not having to go look for any extra budget. But with the savings you made, it'll pay for the Smart Flash storage which goes into your server. So it can cost you zero to implement, but the gains are massive. You can get to scale your margin and revenue by 9x almost for nothing. It takes you a little bit of time and effort. Why would you not look at this? It's one of the best kept secrets inside Oracle Linux for Oracle databases. Have you ever wondered why Oracle Cloud runs on Oracle Linux? Have you ever wondered why Exadata runs on Oracle Linux? There's some really good features in there that really supercharge the database. And it impacts revenue and margin. So in this time of COVID, if you're looking to speed up your systems with the minimal impact to your infrastructure downtime, minimal cost, almost zero, then you should really look at Oracle Linux Smart Flash Cache to doing this with UEK. So, how else can this technology help you? Like I said, it's not just for Oracle database. It'll work with any relational database. If you'll hear Wim Kokarts over and over again say, it was designed to work with any database. With this in mind, you can take your open source database, relational data, Postgres, MySQL, you can take Oracle database, whichever relational database you have, and you can get this performance gains. In fact, one of our customers, when they switched to Oracle UEK, they actually never used to use Oracle database. They implemented it on non-Oracle database and got these performance gains. You can implement this not only on-premise, but you can take this architecture and take your perpetual license to a cloud. So if you want to just take your perpetual license to a cloud and not do the cloud subscription databases which are available out there, you can switch on Smart Flash Cache in all the cloud providers. All the cloud providers have a Smart Flash Cache. So you can get the same performance in a cloud infrastructure. So if you're looking to not only get these performance gains, but then also move it into a cloud, you can use Oracle Linux in any cloud. You're not restricted. And by using Oracle Linux UEK in anybody's cloud and switching on Smart Flash Cache, you get these performance gains. You just need to buy the Compute Smart Flash Cache from your cloud provider. The interesting thing about this is that at the end of unlimited agreements, there's typically a certification you have to provide. So those of you out there who have bought unlimited license agreements for your database or your perpetual license for your database, whether it's Oracle or something else, at the end of that unlimited agreement term, you normally have to report how many database licenses you've used. Not because you have to pay for it, it's because your forward-going support fees will be calculated based on what you report. So if you report you've used 1,000 licenses, then 20% of that will be your ongoing support fee thereafter. So how about, rather than reporting 1,000 licenses, you implement Oracle Linux with Smart Flash Cache and report 1/10 of that, 100,000 licenses, because it's 9x faster, or 200 licenses instead of 1,000. If you can report a lower number of licenses, then your ongoing support fee will be that much lower. So before you get to your unlimited agreement for any perpetual database license, look at implementing this and reducing your number of licenses you have to report. That will really help you actually reduce your ongoing support costs year after year after year. And the last thing is, it'll increase your database performance without increasing your data center footprint. If you actually wanted to, or got a request to add some more servers in your data center and you're struggling for space, power, cooling, then you could implement this and get away with actually adding any more servers. And it could actually keep your data center footprint at the lowest possible footprint possible for yourselves, keeping your costs down. So, Oracle Linux using UEK is optimized with Smart Flash Cache for any database and can get you 800 to 900% performance gains, impacting your revenue and your margin. Why would you not look at this today? It's the quickest way to get application transformation in your data center at the minimal cost and the minimal disruption. If you're an ISV out there and you've got this out there in your customer's install base, very easy to implement. This is Mickey on a Munch and Learn. Give us a call and we'll talk to you about how you can implement this and get these gains. Thanks for joining me today and thanks for listening.